10. Ferry Brawl. Complete chaos broke out one evening in 2022 on a ferry that was carrying passengers from Block Island to Narragansett, Rhode Island. It was a holiday weekend in the state, where residents marked the anniversary of the end of World War II with Victory Day. The ferry service was so busy because of this holiday that an unscheduled ferry was added to the itinerary in order to accommodate the crowds. Unlike other boats that day, there was no state troopers stationed on the last-minute ferry. A large fight broke out among the passengers while it was out on the water. Things apparently got so out of control that police caught up to the ferry with a Coast Guard boat and jumped on board to arrest the parties involved. 4 law enforcement agencies ultimately responded to the scene to get the altercation under control, and 2 people were hospitalized with injuries. It was unclear what started the massive fight, but it's likely safe to assume that overcrowding was a factor. After all, it takes very little for a disagreement to escalate into blows in a stressful environment. But the 7 suspects who were arrested in connection with the fight were uncooperative, according to the police, giving them little to go on when it came to getting to the bottom of the situation. 5 men were charged with disorderly conduct, while a 20-year-old woman was hit with a weapons-related charge for allegedly carrying a knife. Another woman faced 1 count of obstructing an officer in the execution of duty. Defendant Cassandra Laurie maintained her innocence, telling local station WPRI that she was on an upper level of the ferry when the fight broke out. She rushed to the lower level because she wanted to get off the boat as soon as possible. Laurie claimed that she and a man next to her were innocent bystanders, and that she thinks police arrested her because she couldn't answer their questions. She's accused of accepting a shank from another passenger and then throwing it into the water. Other defendants have their own versions of what happened, but at the moment, the cases appear to be ongoing. 9. Valerie Gonzalez. 32-year-old Valerie Gonzalez had been drinking all day when she boarded a Las Vegas-bound JetBlue flight at Florida's Fort Lauderdale-Hollywood Airport in 2019. When she realized she was seated near a 3-year-old, she allegedly threw an unhinged tantrum. As the woman droned on with her expletive-filled tirade, fellow passengers began pulling out their phones to record the woman's inappropriate outburst. At one point in the footage, the little girl's mother can be heard asking if someone just spat on her daughter. Gonzalez replied yes, at which point she appeared to notice that she was being filmed. She then got up and left the plane while screaming angrily at the people around her, dropping F-bombs and telling them to enjoy their time in Vegas. Gonzalez allegedly tried re-entering the plane, telling airline staff that she refused to sit near a 3-year-old. She was accused of hitting airline employees, spitting on a passenger, and continuing to verbally abuse everyone around her as she got back onto the aircraft. However, she wouldn't be continuing on to Vegas as she expected. When officers boarded to arrest her, she refused to walk or follow their commands. So they put Gonzalez in a wheelchair with leg restraints and put a spit mask on her while taking her into custody. She ended up being charged with battery as a result of her inappropriate actions. 8. Bill Kuch. During the morning rush hour one day in 2009, Long Island Railroad passengers noticed that something was off about how the train was being driven. One customer later said that it seemed like a little kid was driving, especially with the way the operator was laying on the horn. The witness kept an eye on the enclosed driver's cab and waited for the door to open. When it did, they saw the driver, 40-year-old Ronald Cabrera, standing away from the controls, meaning someone else was operating the train. That someone was later identified as Bill Kuch, a regular passenger who was on friendly terms with the employees. He allegedly bragged about driving the train after returning to his seat, but nobody seemed impressed, including law enforcement. Kuch and Cabrera were indicated for felony reckless endangerment, and Cabrera faced an additional charge for official misconduct. In court, Cabrera claimed that he let Kuch, a court stenographer, into the cab because he wanted free legal advice about his recent divorce. He pleaded guilty to one misdemeanor count of official misconduct and was sentenced to community service. He was also fired from his job but appealed the decision, and the transit board recommended that he be considered for an entry-level position, but that he should never be allowed to drive a train again. The case against Kuch was ultimately dropped due to a lack of evidence that he was actually operating the train. 7. Irene Torrey. 42-year-old Irene Torrey was on a Prosecco bender in 2018 when she rubbed up against a train conductor in Perth, Scotland. As a result, she was thrown off the train and was arrested, and eventually she was convicted in the case. 2 years later, Torrey was accused of groping an Uber driver and making him touch her. It started when she began asking the driver intrusive questions about his personal life, like if he was married and if he cheated on his wife. As her bizarre behavior continued, the driver began recording the incident on his phone. Torrey eventually leapt from the back of the car into the front passenger seat and offered the driver money to sleep with her. The disturbed driver pulled over and told her that she couldn't change seats when the car was in motion, but she ignored him and started touching him inappropriately. He removed Torrey's hands, but she took off some of her clothing to expose herself to him. Torrey then asked the driver to drop her off at her ex's house so she could persuade him to give her money and booze. When the car arrived, her ex warned the driver to be careful of Torrey. He said he didn't want her at his home and instructed the driver to leave and take her with him. In court, Torrey admitted to forcing the driver to touch her and making inappropriate remarks. She was subsequently sentenced to 3 years of supervision and publicly listed as an offender due to the nature of her crimes. 6. John McGee. While boarding a Philadelphia-bound flight in West Palm Beach, Florida in early 2023, 66-year-old John McGee allegedly claimed he had a bomb in his bag. A witness later described seeing the suspect on the jet bridge, repeatedly slamming his luggage on the floor while making the bomb threat and saying, "You don't know what you're in for." In response, law enforcement rushed to the scene. Flights were grounded and the terminal was evacuated and shut down, leaving many passengers sitting in planes on the tarmac while others were deplaned without explanation. Several people posted on social media about seeing unusual security activity and how they weren't being told what was going on. According to an affidavit, when a deputy asked McGee if he had said anything he should not have said while boarding, he reportedly said no, and that he didn't say anything about blowing up a plane. Officials found nothing suspicious in his bags, and the terminal was finally reopened 3 hours after the ordeal began. The flight to Philadelphia was delayed until the next day, and passengers were put up in hotels. In the meantime, McGee landed himself in accommodation at the Broward County Jail on charges of making a false report concerning planting a bomb, an explosive, or a weapon of mass destruction. 5. Charlie Meadows. When a passenger got out of his car without paying one day, Liverpool taxi driver John Gunning followed the man in his vehicle in an attempt to collect the fare he was owed. They got into a shouting match, and when the fare dodger began kicking his car, Gunning exited the vehicle and the men began to fist fight. Chaos ensued as people from nearby joined in the brawl and vandalized the taxi. At first, Gunning appeared to have subdued the non-paying passenger, later identified as 23-year-old Charlie Meadows. However, Meadows somehow gained the upper hand and then stabbed Gunning 3 times. In addition to being physically injured, Gunning's car was so damaged that it was no longer drivable. Police arrested Meadows, whose defense attorney, Peter Killen, argued in court that his client was drunk and was going through personal issues at the time of the incident. He insisted Meadows was deeply remorseful for his behavior and that he'd made a lot of progress straightening his life out while in prison, awaiting the outcome of the case. Meadows pleaded guilty to several charges stemming from the fight with Gunning and another incident, including wounding with intent, possession of a bladed weapon, and trying to take drugs into prison. In the end, he was sentenced to more than 6 years in prison. 4. Heidi McKinney. During a flight from Las Vegas to Portland, Oregon in 2016, a 19-year-old woman sitting in an otherwise empty row was joined by a drunk lady who sat down in the seat right next to hers. The sloshed stranger tried forcing the teen to drink alcohol, then repeatedly touched her inappropriately. She licked the victim's ear, straddled her, touched her chest repeatedly, and made explicit comments. When the victim pushed the woman off of her, she called the 19-year-old poor. Airline staff moved the drunk woman, later identified as Heidi McKinney, and kept her away from the victim for the rest of the flight. Upon landing, McKinney was federally charged with abusive contact. She pleaded guilty to the reduced charge of assault with intent to commit a felony and was sentenced to 8 months of house arrest, along with 3 years of probation. McKinney's male fiancé reportedly told authorities that she can't metabolize alcohol and that the behavior she showed on the plane is the type of thing that happens when she drinks. By then, she already had 2 DWI convictions under her belt, and her problems with alcohol seemed to have continued after the airplane incident. After one court hearing several months before the case was concluded, she was allegedly found passed out in a bar. According to her lawyer, she went to rehab and was working to get her life on track. McKinney didn't say anything at her sentencing, but wrote an apology to the victim. The 19-year-old planned to read a statement, but was so traumatized that her grandmother had to read it for her. 3. Racist cab rider. When a passenger got into the front seat of a taxi in Birmingham, England one day in 2020, driver Abid Mustafa asked the man to sit in the back due to COVID-19 safety policies. This allegedly made the passenger irrationally angry, and he erupted into a racist tirade. Mustafa pulled over and warned the rider that his behavior wouldn't be tolerated. The passenger agreed to stop, but as soon as they were back on the road, the man launched right back into an aggressive rant. At the end of the ride, Mustafa started recording the disturbing behavior and threatened to post the video on social media. In the clip, the irate rider could be heard reminding Mustafa that they were in England and threatening to blow him out of the effing water. Mustafa calmly told the man that if he posted the video online, a lot of people would see how he was acting. The man said he didn't give a flying you-know-what and continued rambling, finally exiting the car after Mustafa politely threatened to start charging a waiting fare. He was later arrested, and Mustafa was praised for his calm and patient response to the out-of-control passenger. Racist treatment toward taxi drivers is an ongoing problem in England's West Midlands region, according to Mustafa. He said that he hoped footage of the incident would prompt local officials to have security cameras installed in taxi cabs, which he thinks would majorly reduce abuse toward drivers. 2. Bus passengers' abusive tirade. In late 2019, footage of a disturbing attack on a bus driver in Vancouver, Canada, appeared on social media and quickly went viral. Recorded by a passenger, the footage showed a man violently kicking the bus doors and allegedly spitting on the driver before exiting. The driver had repeatedly asked the man to step back behind a red line into the passenger area, but he kept crossing it. When it became clear that the suspect wasn't going to cooperate, the driver pulled over and told him to get out of the bus, at which point he flew into a tantrum. Although the driver was physically unharmed, he was reportedly shaken up by the man's behavior. The ordeal came less than a day after transit workers in the area went on strike for better working conditions and wages. The region's transit union had also called for police to take action amid a disturbing spike in attacks on drivers. 2 days after the incident, police took a man into custody on a separate case under British Columbia's Mental Health Act and recognized him as the suspect involved in the event on the bus. He was arrested, but authorities were still investigating to determine whether to press criminal charges. But it's now more than 3 years later, and there hasn't been any new information released on the case. 1. Arielle Jean Jackson. In 2021, 32-year-old Arielle Jean Jackson allegedly got into an argument with a Southwest Airlines employee right as she boarded a New York-bound flight in Dallas. The employee ordered Jackson to leave the aircraft, but as she was exiting the plane, she got into another verbal confrontation with a different staff member. According to police, she punched the worker in the head with a closed fist, sending them to the hospital with injuries. Officers boarded the plane and took Jackson into custody on suspicion of aggravated assault. Authorities declined to reveal many details on the matter, citing an ongoing investigation, so it's unclear what the initial argument was about. But considering how quickly the decision was made to kick her off the flight, it's likely safe to assume that the disagreement was heated and escalated fast. Would you rather have a 5-star Uber passenger rating go down due to a driver who is unsatisfied with your tip, or be stuck in a rideshare with a verbally aggressive fellow customer? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.